why fund managers can't beat the S&P 500? Because they're sheep, and sheep get slaughtered.
The numbers told the story, they always do.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Because all we care about is getting fucking rich.
You connect points I don't even know to look for.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information. Public's out there throwing darts at a board, sport. I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things.
Welcome, Karma Clan. It's the next episode in the Sports Trading Desk preseason previews. We've covered the AFC East and the NFC East. Now we're going to move on to the North. So we'll kick off with the AFC North. Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Cincinnati Bengals. And definitely with Zach and I is one of our favorite teams for sure, the Ravens. I think we made some great calls last year in our Sportfolios. Made some good money, outperformed every single one of our competitors. But I would say definitely our biggest whiff was the Ravens, who we did bet on the under at the beginning of the season. But nonetheless, we didn't lose that much money on the Ravens last year because we actually didn't bet against them very much. Right, Zach?
Yeah, we bet on the Ravens. We faded them more often than not, or we just didn't bet on their games, period. But it worked out in the long run, as we saw with the Tennessee Titans. So our macro thesis on the Ravens played out as we thought it might.
We'll jump right in to talking about the Ravens. We'll start from the top in this episode with the long favorite to win the division and has one of the biggest win totals of the season. The heavy favorite to go to the Super Bowl and even win the Super Bowl. How steep are those prices on the Ravens, Corey?
Very steep. So the over-under for the wins, we're looking at 11.5. Divisional odds, you're going to have to lay minus 250. AFC odds, it's as cheap as plus 246. And the Super Bowl, you're going to be looking at plus 550.
I don't know what to feel about that. I mean, I don't find any of it attractive.
Nope.
I mean, I think this is going to be a super tough division. I think as we kind of talked with one another in the prep sessions, every team in this division is better. I don't know if the Ravens are better. I think the Ravens obviously didn't get worse. I mean, they returned pretty much everybody except one key starting lineman, offensive lineman. But pretty much other than that, they bring back everybody. So they definitely have the continuity factor going for them. But the Browns are better. The Steelers are definitely better. And the Bengals they can't get worse. I mean, they won 2 games last year. And they started Ryan Finley at quarterback for multiple games. They're going to be better than 2 wins. And the Ravens struggled with the Bengals in 1 game. So this is going to be a much tougher test for the Ravens this year, just getting through the division than it was last year. And it wasn't like they just breezed through the division last year as it was. Struggled versus the Steelers in a game. Probably should have lost it in OT if Juju Smith-Schuster doesn't fumble. Got their asses kicked by the Browns at home. Just got completely run over. And as I mentioned, squeaked by the Bengals by like 6 or 7 points, didn't cover the double digits. Going over and expecting them to win 12 games. Hell no, especially not this season. So I would definitely bet that under. That's kind of like at least my initial thoughts there. I think everyone, if you've listened to us last year, how Zach and I kind of feel about the Ravens, and we still kind of feel the same, but, we're not going to be super stubborn and say we should bet them under 8.5 wins again. So Corey, let's hear your fresh take on the Ravens. Break up the monotony here.
Yeah, so looking at the Ravens, I think I'm more so looking at this division. I'd be looking at the Browns and Steelers more so than fading the Ravens. I think both the Browns and Steelers are going to be very competitive this year, and I think either one of those teams could possibly take this division. I just look at the Ravens, and the offense is completely built around Lamar Jackson, which credit's due to them. They did a great job at it, but that offense in general is just aggressive, and they go for fourth downs, and they were finding advantages and edges early in games because if they weren't playing with the lead, Lamar's effectiveness took a nosedive. And just with that offense being so unique with Lamar, there's just no questioning like how unique it was. But the more teams see the unique offense, the less unique it will become and the more prepared teams are for it. So the effectiveness of all of it is only on a downward trajectory. Now, I'm not saying it can't be efficient long-term, but it won't reach near the heights we saw last season.
Yeah, and to elaborate on that, Corey, part of our game comp going into that Titans game was actually that Browns game from earlier in the season as to a situation where a team that could really run the ball and build an early lead could essentially throw the whole Ravens scheme and game plan out the window, which is exactly what happened in the playoffs. And that's kind of my macro concern with this team once again this year is if they're going to win the Super Bowl, it's not going to be because of Lamar Jackson and the offense. It's going to be because their defense is that good. And so that's where I'm torn. Whereas last year I was fairly confident that the Ravens defense had a ways to go to be really good, and they actually were better than I expected. And that's why I didn't believe the Ravens would ever really vie for a Super Bowl. This year, I think if you think they're going to go for a Super Bowl run, it's going to be not because the offense is putting up 60 points against the Miami Dolphins or some hapless team that's unprepared for the gimmick of their offense. I think it's going to be because the defense is that consistent, that good, and that capable of keeping Lamar Jackson where he belongs, which is in a position to get out in front, to risk going for fourth downs, 4th and 1, 4th and 2, to have the safety come on up so he can throw one-on-one balls down the field to Hollywood Brown. But it's all predicated on that defense. Yeah. And that's ultimately where this team's success is going to hinge, is when they got destroyed by the Browns, they gave up 40 points. Derrick Henry ran all over them with Ryan Tannehill leading the way. Mm-hmm. That's the team's ultimate kryptonite, is the defense. So if the defense is Pittsburgh level this year, yeah, maybe Ravens ride Lamar to the Super Bowl. They did with Joe Flacco. Yeah. So, that's kind of my split personality of the Ravens. Which way you want to go with it is really how much do you buy into their defense? We all know what Lamar Jackson is. We know what the offense is. We've seen it. He can't get behind. So if the defense is really top 5, that's where this team's going to go far.
Yeah, I mean, they're a total boom or bust team. Now, it was mostly boom last year. And granted, I mean, you can say like, well, when they fall behind, they can't come back, or they haven't proven that they can come back. Well, the thing is they were almost never behind. So this is what the Bulls on the Ravens would say. The team was undefeated on 4th and 1s until the playoffs, and then they went 0 for 2 on 4th and 1. And it obviously blew up the game plan. Then you start forcing, Jackson to become more predictable, saying that he can't, it's not in the team's best interest for him to kind of scramble around and kind of get 5 or 6 yards that maybe turns into 15 yards and then sometimes turns into these explosive 60-yard runs, because now they need to pass. And when they need to pass, the defense can move back, knowing that, he's not going to be running around trying to gain 5 or 6 yards that ultimately could explode to a massive gain, because they need to pass. And then it puts a lot more pressure on him. Now, for all the hoopla that Jackson got, Ravens were 27th ranked passing offense. So, obviously he's an amazing talent. But how sustainable is it? We've seen, basically one guy really make it sustainable. And that was Michael Vick. And I thought Michael Vick had a lot more talent than what Jackson so far has, especially from a passing perspective. So it really comes down to not saying that, Jackson doesn't have talent, that he's not super fast, that he's not super athletic, that he doesn't make some defenses look idiotic. It's the fact is that type of game is not sustainable in the NFL. And we've seen it time and time again. All he needs to do is get one deep hit to the knee, and then his career is over, essentially, because it's his running game that opens up the rest of his skill sets. Now, I'll admit he's a little bit better of a passer. He was a better passer last year than he was the previous year. He did improve on that aspect, but he's by no means like a Michael Vick or even a top 10 passer, much less, comparable to Patrick Mahomes, which so many people have made. So I don't want to go on this long rant on the Ravens, and I'm sure we will over the course of the season. So this is just the preview podcast, so I'll tone it down. But it's good to hear Corey, at least, again, a fresh take, come in and kind of support kind of the same philosophy that Zach and I have kind of been touting on this team for a while. But yes, the secondary, probably the best in the NFL. I mean, Peters, Jimmy Smith, Marlon Humphrey, Earl Thomas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, and I think the Ravens realize that they need to lead with their defense. Adding Campbell to that defensive line, it's probably even better than it was last year. And one thing I noticed, the Ravens actually have the most expensive unit in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball. So they've definitely looked into that. They know that they have to put the money on the defensive end to keep themselves in games with Lamar at quarterback. So they know where his talent is, and I think they realize he's not a Patrick Mahomes type of player, like a lot of people want to believe he is.
That's actually, Corey, the best take about the Ravens we've heard, and I'll use that all season, is the Ravens are telling us exactly what Lamar Jackson is and what he's not. Mm-hmm. And because money talks. So they're investing in their defense knowing if our defense is strong, Lamar can be successful. That's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And again, I think
exactly.
it's going to continue to be a boom bust offense. And I think, they're still going to blow out teams by 30 points, some team that just, they can't get their hand, or they're just not fast enough, or, it kind of gets away from them. Because the Ravens are one of those teams that, I mean, if they got you, I mean, they'll just stomp on your throat. I mean, they spoke volumes just in week 1 when they're up by 30 points and doing fake punts and runs for touchdowns. Like, what's the point? What's the point in that? They want to beat you by 50. So that's just one of the things that you want to keep in mind if you are considering betting against the Ravens. And again, to our credit, at least, Zach, last year, as much as we were off market on the Ravens, we actually did not bet against them very frequently at all last year. So again, I would say I would take the under. It's 11 and a half games, you said, Corey?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, I'll take the under on that. How about you, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stick to my guns when I go under.
How about you, Corey?
One more thing I wanted to throw in there, just get it out there. I'm a big fan of J.K. Dobbins, though, that they drafted. I think he's going to fit in well with that offense if he gets some usage, and I think he will. At Ohio State, he had the highest rate of shotgun runs of all backs in the draft. So I think that really pairs well with the Ravens. So I think a fantasy, maybe a late flyer, he's definitely maybe someone worthy of consideration. But when it comes to the 11 and a half, I think I'm going to have to side with the under as well. I think everyone else in the division improves, so I'd lean towards the under.
Yeah. And that's what we opened with. And I think what a lot of people are not taking into consideration this year is that, the Ravens pretty much ran through the division last year, and that's just not going to happen this year. I think that the only loss was that stomping by the Browns. It's going to be a lot more difficult this year. The thing is, outside that, they do have a relatively easy schedule. To Corey's point, I think teams are going to adjust. We see this time and time again where we kind of see some sort of philosophy or scheme in the NFL, and it looks like it's unbeatable and unstoppable, and then it kind of gets figured out. And it doesn't mean that it's a moot point anymore, but it's just not as explosive, as dominating as it was when it kind of first took the league by storm. Let's move on to the Steelers. Now, this is the team I'm kind of most bullish on. Of course, Big Ben got hurt in the second game last year. Then it was a rotation between Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, neither of whom were very effective. Juju Smith-Schuster got hurt. They were hurt in the running back. James Conner missed time. One thing that they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, and that defense just really came around last year. Was one of the top defenses in the league. They bring back a lot of the same players. You expect that defense is going to maybe regress a little bit, but that the offense should support that defense a lot more so than it did, because it was basically completely absent last year. And even still, the Steelers were competitive in a lot of games, especially down the stretch. And in fact, this year, as we move to 7 teams in the playoffs, if 7 teams made the playoffs last year, the Steelers would have snuck in. I think a lot of people are down on the Steelers thinking that they were complete trash last year, when that really just wasn't the case. It was more so just the offense was trash. But now if you bring back Big Ben, you have this nice set of wide receivers, especially with James Washington, Juju Smith-Schuster, and then the compliments at running back as well. There's a lot of upside to this team. And of course, it's extremely well coached. So what's the pricing on the Steelers, Corey?
Yeah, we're looking at an over-under of 9 wins, divisional odds of plus 450, AFC odds of 14-1, and Super Bowl odds of 27-1.
2.5 game spread between the Ravens and the Steelers. That's not accurate. What do you think, Zach?
I think this team is going to hinge on, will Big Ben stay healthy? And if he does, this is definitely my under the radar, more so than the Ravens, Chiefs to win the AFC, maybe even win the Super Bowl. And it's really predicated because they have a top 5 defense that's still mostly young and hungry. And, they got a new receiver, Chase Claypool, who's been looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, true.
Who's a big 6'4" guy. The thing with the Steelers, and this year, we got to really kind of harp on this point. You brought up a great point. In 2011 with the lockout, Brett, there was a 20% increase in injuries in the season, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's important is we're on another shortened kind of getting ready for this season type situation. And then it's compounded by the COVID situation, which, as we saw in baseball, you may have 3, 4, 10, 14, 20 players all of a sudden are out for a game or two. Mm-hmm. And so depth of talent is really going to potentially be important this season. And the Steelers are one of the best franchises at assessing talent, as we see since forever. They always find the best players in their drafts. They just do. This team is going to have depth, so if they miss a player or two, as long as it's not Big Ben, I think that's really the key. As we saw last year, they're going to be right there. They'll win at least 8 games. And if they're healthy, probably 9, 10, 11, maybe even 12 if things go really well. Yeah. So,
the thing is
definitely a team to get behind.
For sure. And one of the stats I thought was interesting as well was, so the offense was top 5 in giveaways. So they gave 30 giveaways last year. So again, if you bring in Big Ben and you bring that down, that's probably at least one extra win and probably more than that. And that pushes the Steelers right into the playoffs then. And in fact, they probably beat the Ravens at least once. In addition to that, the offense was just so bad, they did not score more than 28 points once last year. And they had the lowest quarterback average completion distance in the entire league of 4 yards. Just a massive improvement. You can't understate it, how big this addition of if Big Ben can play a full season, just how much he brings to that offense and just how putrid the quarterback play was for the Steelers last year. Corey, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, to your point, Big Ben has just a much higher floor and ceiling than both Rudolph and Hodges had, and probably even combined. So I think that offense, it's going to come down to if they can put up points on the board. And last year, I think they were just way too predictable. But that was maybe just they were kind of forced their hand with kind of Hodges and Rudolph at times. I think they need to incorporate maybe some more play action, but I've liked what I've heard from Tomlin, I guess, about their new quarterback coach, Matt Canada. I actually heard that he's going to maybe kind of incorporate some new, fresh and new schematic ideas to the offensive game plan. So I think that's a big plus for them. Looking down their schedule, I know they're and they only find themselves dogs of 4+ points in one game. So they'll play 7 games versus teams forecasted to win 7.5 games or fewer. So the schedule has wins for the taking. And this Steelers team brings back a lot of snaps from last year too. They're 5th in the NFL in snaps returning with 82%. Overall, 12th on offense with 80% and 4th on defense with 84% of snaps. So I think this team returns a lot of the players they have. And my main concern would maybe be some of the youth and inexperience at the wide receiver and running back positions. But that defense, if it can even perform even close to what it was last year, I think this team definitely is going to be improved. They have strong defensive duos at each position. I think they definitely can contend for the division.
Yeah, I think there's definitely inexperience around, but there's talent. Even supplementing James Conner in the backfield. I really like rookie Anthony McFarland Jr. from Maryland. I mean, he was just explosively fast. And that was kind of a component that I feel like in the backfield the Steelers have been missing for a few years. It's kind of more so been this ground and pound type running backs with like Benny Snell, James Conner, and Troy Edmonds last year. I think, there's another component there. I've read some good things about Chase Claypool as well. And I mean, I don't even think they even needed Chase Claypool because, they got Deontay Johnson, who looked super good last year as a rookie. Then Juju Smith-Schuster, now the addition of Eric Ebron, and then still James Washington. And so if you throw Chase Claypool in there and if he can meaningfully contribute, that's a stacked wide receiver set. And then, of course, assuming Big Ben stays healthy, he's got a lot of weapons there that have massive upside ceilings. I don't see a lot of weaknesses around this team. Great linebackers with Bud Dupree, Devin Bush, TJ Watt. Great secondary defensive line that can put on pressure. Steven Tuitt, again, one of their best defensive linemen, missed 10 games last year. So just a lot of wealth to go around. So 9 games seems low. So again, with the caveat that I actually won't be betting any overs, I do like that over in the sense of I think the Steelers will win more than 9 games. How about you, Zach, on the total?
Yeah, I'm going to go over. I would do a ticket on win the AFC or Super Bowl just to have it personally.
In fact, what's the division?
Yeah.
I would bet Steelers to win the division.
Looking at plus 450.
I like that.
That's nice.
I also in agreement. I'd definitely lean towards the over. I think with the 6th easiest strength of schedule on the season, and this is a team that managed to win 8 games last year with an offense that was 30th in rushing and 30th in passing. So that's just brutal. And they still found a way to win 8 games. I think you can only look towards the over.
All right. Bullish on the Steelers. So let's move on to the Browns, a team that Zach and I were high on last year. That was a misstep as well. Again, plenty of talent, just super poor execution. And of course, some regression as well from especially Baker Mayfield. Hunt missed half the season. There were some other injuries throughout. The offensive line really underperformed. And then, of course, just miserable coaching decisions, kind of left and right, just explicitly bad decisions made throughout the season. And then Myles Garrett missing the last, 6 or 7 games after that incident with the Steelers. Olivier Vernon also missed a lot of time. Christian Kirksey, the starting linebacker, Joe Sherbert, also missed time. Cornerbacks, Denzel Ward missed time. Greedy Williams missed time. There's injuries all over. They never could fully recover, but they showed flashes of what they could be, especially in that Ravens game and a few games more so down the stretch. So I think there's opportunity there. What's the prices on the Browns, Corey?
Yeah, they're just a shade behind the Steelers in almost every category. We're looking at an over-under wins of 8.5, divisional odds plus 492, AFC odds of 15-1, and Super Bowl odds of 28-1.
So my views on them are definitely much more muted this year. I think there's way more, especially since they're priced basically like the Steelers. I think there's way more opportunity, more upside taking the Steelers and the Browns. But I like the new coach, Steven Stefanski from Minnesota. Looks like they're going to use a lot of two tight end sets, implementing this kind of Vikings offense. They signed Austin Hooper, so you'll have that Hooper and Njoku. And then, of course, spotted by OBJ and Landry, and then Kareem Hunt and Chubb in the back end. So there's a lot of talent to go around. I want to see it to believe it. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think being high on the Browns last year was kind of a fading the sharp market, which was not buying into the Browns. And I think this year is the right move as well. Is their offense is definitely going to be a little better, especially as the season progresses. Maybe not in the beginning of the season just because of the adjustment of the new coaching staff. But they have so much talent, it may not matter in times. It's difficult to say because they are still the Browns in that they're starting over, right? So part of the mantra of, why are the Steelers and why are the Browns the Browns? Steelers have had the same head coach and, general management for how many years, right? So, and it's like a passing a baton every 2 decades. I mean, the Browns, when you have this type of turnover from top to bottom in your organization, there's just no consistency. There's no culture. There's no buying into anything. I think that started from last year into this year, even with the new head coaching staff. But I think it's going to take one more year for this team to really kind of buy in to whatever's going on. And that's why I would be hesitant to get too excited about the Browns this year on a macro view, and would still look for your spots, be cautious with them, make them show it before you buy it, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. How about you, Corey?
Yeah, I think I like them more than I maybe did last year. They did face the hardest schedule of opposing defenses last year, so that didn't really go in their favor. And I do like the hire of Stefanski as well. I think he's a great fit for Baker. They used 11 personnel way too much in 2019, and Mayfield's passing splits as well as his sack rate were just substantially worse in 11. And I think they thought they were doing themselves a favor, spreading out the field, maybe similarly to Mayfield's success at Oklahoma, but the stats just spoke to a whole different narrative. And we just know that Stefanski definitely won't overuse 11. In Minnesota, he used 3+ wide receivers on 23% of snaps, and that's by far the least in the NFL. The NFL average was actually 65%. So that's just drastic. And I think Mayfield will maybe find a little more confidence this year. He definitely showed a lot of arrogance, but I think he'll never lose that arrogance, but I do think he could maybe gain some true confidence with the Browns this season. They have only 4 games versus top half pass defenses in 2020, and they'll go from facing the hardest schedule of opposing defenses to the second easiest strength of schedule in 2020. So I definitely think things will maybe click a little bit better for them, but at the same time, they're 28th in the NFL in return snaps. So like you guys mentioned as well, they are kind of starting over. New head coach, new offensive coordinator, and new defensive coordinator. So you can't be too bullish on them, but I definitely do see some improvements from last season potentially.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's gonna come down to Mayfield's performance as well. So in his rookie season, he had 27 touchdowns and 14 picks. Impressive. Last year, 22 touchdowns, 21 interceptions. And a lot of that came down to the pressure and just a miserable offensive line. So he was sacked 40 times last year. So that was one area that they specifically targeted and went and did upgrade. They signed, a tackle in Jack Conklin from the Titans, and then also drafted another tackle in Jedrick Willis from Alabama in the first round. So they got 2 new tackles. So they're upgrading one of the major weaknesses of that side of the ball. So I think, that should pay some dividends. I think strength of the offensive line is one of those things, we all understand is an important component of an offense's efficacy, but I feel like it's still underrated. And I think that if the offensive line can come together and play better, that everything else will just happen naturally. Mayfield will play better. Wide receivers have time to get open. Running backs find holes. The whole offense can come together if the offensive line sticks together. So I think, if we see some improvement there, then I think, we'll see the downstream benefits as well. I think it still remains to be seen. Again, in a year where continuity may be more prized than in a typical year, with the constant turnover, new head coach, new players, new personnel, new offensive playbook, it might be tough to implement in a meaningful way. But Corey makes some good points in that, it's definitely going to be a more favorable schedule this year. And then I think Zach's right as well, that you're going to find spots with the Browns, that they're not going to be a team to necessarily just always bet on or to fade, but there's going to be moments where there's going to be opportunity. So now we can move on to the final team, the Bengals, Cincinnati Bengals, 2-14 last year. One of the most miserable teams there was. And it was so funny too, because actually week one, Zach, I don't know, did we bet on the Bengals week one? I know we were hot on the Bengals week one, plus 9.5 versus Seattle. And they put in a great performance, almost beat Seattle in Seattle.
Oh.
And then it was all downhill from there.
I know I was.
I remember them being one of my favorite bets week 2. I think it was against the Niners. They were maybe catching 2.5 points, I think. And I absolutely loved it. And then I think they got blown out 41-10 or 41-17 or something like that.
Yeah. No, we faded that, I think, because Brett was so high on the Niners preseason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we definitely were not going to give Bengals only 2 points for that game.
So the Cincinnati Bengals. Corey, what's the pricing on the Bengals?
The Bengals, we're looking at an over-under wins of 6, divisional odds of 30-1, AFC odds of 70-1, and Super Bowl odds of 135-1.
I'm surprised the total's that high, 6. I mean, for a team that won 2 games last year. I mean, I don't have any strong opinion on the Bengals. I think it's pretty clear there's, separation between Ravens, Steelers, Browns, and Bengals. I wonder what the odds would be on the Bengals finishing last, like minus 1,500 or something. The thing is obviously they have Joe Burrow at quarterback now. Now, Joe Burrow is, much older than a typical rookie. So he's as old as Sam Darnold. So he kind of brings, at least from an age perspective, some level of maturity. So it's possible he could, perform a little bit better under duress and stress that you expect him to be receiving this year, better than expected. He's definitely got weapons, so AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, T. Higgins, Auden Tate. I mean, there's a lot of weapons around there. Plus in the backfield, Gio Bernard and Joe Mixon, of course. The O-line was, catastrophic last year. And one of the reasons, losing Jonah Williams who was their first-round pick tackle last year, right in the preseason. So he missed the entire year. So he'll be back this year. So that should help build some of the strength in the offensive line. But besides that, they didn't really add meaningfully to the offensive line. So they must have saw something there that they liked. I don't necessarily trust their talent evaluation. I think, Coach Taylor is one of the worst in the league. Definitely one of the youngest, one of the most inexperienced. And I feel like Bengals, hired a young coach from the McVay tree with the assumption that, buying high on that theme and that he's going to be, a true McVay protege, which still remains to be seen and hasn't been the case so far. Then on defense, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins, signed DJ Reader. So they have talent on the defensive line. It's just everything else from beyond that now gets questionable. In the middle, there's almost no talent and no experience. In the secondary, they made a few signings, Trey Waynes, McKenzie. I think Trey Waynes got hurt today, though, so we'll have to see what that looks like. But that's nothing to write home about either. So I don't see a lot to like about the Bengals. I feel like they've definitely gotten better. But, of course, with the rookie quarterback, questionable talent in the play calling regime, not a lot to love here. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think they're definitely going to be better than last year. And I think, their offensive, talent is there. They have a O-line coach that's coming back. So, there should be more consistency on the line. So the offense should be more consistent and stronger. The defense has some pieces, and, they were super banged up last year as well. So, they should be marginally improved, though they were one of the worst in the league last year. And going back to kind of the big reason I was down on the Bengals last year, besides the talent and all the injuries, was really the coach. And, Zach Taylor, when you dig into kind of his history, he's really, he is a nobody. And, it sucks because his name's Zach, and all Zachs are typically amazing. But, and I say that humbly from the bottom of my heart, I'll give a quick analogy. My job on the side, when I have to hire contractors, okay? I had to hire a bunch of contractors for the largest esports event in the history of esports, okay? So you could say I was kind of like the GM of this one-time esports extravagant event. You had all this talent that you hired for this huge esports event. How about you bring some over to the new Call of Duty event that we got going on? And I go, okay, yeah, sure. Take this guy that I hired off the street. That guy sucked. So yes, I was putting on one of the biggest events, esports. It doesn't mean that all the people I hire are A+ talent. So just because Sean McVay is, let's say, a stellar, and I don't even think he's A+ grade coach, but even if he's an A+ coach, it's not to say that his assistant coaches are A+ assistants just by association. And we know this to be true because the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick, none of his assistants have ever had any NFL success as head coaches except Bill O'Brien, and he sucks. So the point being, just by association really means next to nothing except did you learn anything about scheme or what you shouldn't do. And so I do think Zach Taylor will improve as a head coach this year. They're good to begin with. And I've hired enough people now in my other profession on the side to know this about people, is some people will always be C grade. It doesn't matter how much they learn, doesn't matter how much they do, it doesn't matter what you think they could get out of a situation. This guy, this coach, and I feel bad, but I think he genuinely is. He's a C- coach, and he's never going to be anything more than that, no matter who he has, where he's at, or what the situation is. So that's just what it is. So he'll be better this year, but in general, on a macro scale, he's not going to be with the Bengals more than 3 years. It's just, he'll be the first one to go. And I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Callahan took over in his stead when he gets fired at some point. Mm-hmm. So just throwing that out there from a macro kind of why we think Zach Taylor isn't good is because he's got no history to back up that he is any good. He was picked up off the street to fill in an assistant coach spot. He wasn't that good when he was in college coaching Cincinnati. So just putting some context to why we don't buy into Zach Taylor.
Yeah, and the Bengals could start off 0-7. And if they do, who knows? Maybe Zach Taylor doesn't make it out of the season because he didn't get great reviews last year, and he didn't get a lot of great reviews, at least from the broader community, even when he was first hired. So the Bengals start off with KC, Minnesota, Falcons, Colts, Chargers, Browns, Eagles. Definitely going to be underdogs. They might be underdogs in every game, but they're going to be heavy underdogs in almost all of those games. And so 0-7 is probably even money. Zach Taylor certainly going to be on the hot seat. So what are some of your thoughts, Corey?
Yeah, right off the bat, kind of you mentioned the schedule. They face the 8th toughest strength of schedule. And actually throughout their season, of their 16 games, 5 of them, they have at a rest disadvantage. And if you don't have strong coaching in those situations, I think that it compounds. So that's a tough look for them as well. I think they're going to look obviously probably better than they did last year, but maybe that doesn't say a whole lot. They were 0-8 in one-score games in 2019, so not a lot went their way in those close games, but maybe some of that represents kind of the team and the makeup. They struggle. They don't return a lot of their snaps. I do like Waynes, Alexander, and Jackson for their defensive backs. That's better than what they've had for quite some time. It's not necessarily stellar, but it should help some improvements there. I think their biggest get in free agency was DJ Reader. Overall, I think that it just won't look too great. They were the 28th passed offense last year, 23rd rushing offense, 28th passing defense, 28th rushing defense. So, and I just don't think they made enough changes to really improve on any of those too greatly. So the one thing they maybe have going for them with Burrow probably being their quarterback is they only face 4 top 10 pass defenses in 2020. So they have the 8th easiest schedule of pass defenses. So as hard as their schedule is, the passing game might not be as bad as it could be with a rookie quarterback. So they have that going for them.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Joe Burrow obviously getting great reviews coming out of college, but I haven't read too much on what he's looked like in training camp so far. Zach, you said you were reading some things saying that it wasn't too glowing of a review.
Yeah, actually, I think Corey picked up on that his velocity is not at where it was expected.
Mm-hmm.
He does seem to have a good rapport with Tyler Boyd, but, I'm not sure how much to buy into Joe Burrow on a macro level. I don't know if he's really going to be that much better than a Baker Mayfield type quarterback, who I think's a middling quarterback at this point. We'll kind of see how it plays out, but is he the next, Andrew Luck? Probably not.
No.
Is he closer to a Darnold / Baker Mayfield? Probably. So
if he's as good as Sam Darnold, I think that would be an A+ win for the Bengals. But I think as on our previous podcast with Corey, we're both kind of higher on Darnold than the market is. But Joe Burrow will definitely at least have the talent around him on the offensive side to at least facilitate some growth and possibly some success. Really will come down to that offensive line, though, because if you're going to put a ton of pressure on a brand new rookie, it's just not going to be good, especially with that tough beginning of the schedule. So I think to close on the Bengals, I would say probably under 6 wins. It seems a bit generous, especially in this division where I think they'll definitely go 0-6. So that's 6 losses right there. And then that super tough beginning of the schedule, which only includes 1 division opponent. So that's another 6 losses. That's 12. So that would be sufficient to go under 6. What do you think, Corey? Where are you leaning on the total?
Yeah, with a rookie quarterback, I think 6 is maybe a little steep. You got to have a pretty strong roster or a very strong defense, I think, a lot of times to see a rookie quarterback come into the league and immediately win 7-8 games. So with that strength of schedule, I definitely lean towards the under as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it starts at the top, and if your head coaching's off, rookie QB, defense that's probably going to have some holes, offensive line that's going to need some time to gel if it's any good at all. Just a lot of hanging chads, and that schedule is going to be brutal. What you guys said, I'm not so sure Zach Taylor makes it at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
If they go 0-7 and they're looking bad, I mean, who knows? So,
and they've already, they got a history of injury issues. So, I mean, it sounds like AJ Green's already getting beat up. T. Higgins is getting beat up. John Ross is already getting beat up. So we talk about that Joe Burrow has a lot of talent around him, but it seems like they're all injury prone. Who knows what the sustainability behind that talent really is going to be for him. And again, with a questionable offensive line, Joe Burrow himself could be getting beat up this year. Any final thoughts on Bengals, guys?
I got nothing.
Okay, great.
Nope.
No, so that wraps up our views of the AFC North. I guess we'll just close and kind of just summarize in the sense of who we think is going to win the division. I think it kind of seemed a little bit clear from some of our thoughts, but I'm going to go with the Steelers. How about you, Zach?
I'm going to go with my original prediction. I think you're going to have a funky situation where the Ravens are going to win the division, having beat the Steelers twice. Steelers are going to make the playoffs and beat the Ravens in the playoffs on their way to the AFC Championship game.
Wow, that's very specific.
Yes.
All right, Corey, what do you think?
Well, I definitely think the AFC North is probably the strongest division in the AFC. So I think up top, I could really probably be talked into either the Ravens or the Steelers. Obviously, with the money or the plus money you gain in the Steelers, I'd probably side with that. But overall, I think just with the season being so largely unpredictable, I think I'll probably side with the team that is maybe less dependent on their game plan and their pieces for that game plan. So it's tough, but it's too easy to go Ravens, I think, in this case. And I just would feel way too boring. I'll go with the Steelers.
All right, so
Corey convinced me. I want Steelers.
So did you just flip-flop entirely? It's the Steelers win the division, and then they play the Ravens go to the Super Bowl?
Yeah, so Corey actually brings up a very good point about this season specifically to end on, is because of the COVID situation and no preseason and all that stuff, and because we know the Ravens are a one-trick pony on offense, more or less, if Lamar Jackson gets hurt or they're compromised at all, their whole trajectory gets thrown out the window. So whereas the Steelers, they managed 8 wins last year without Big Ben. Mm-hmm. So with that defense, they could find a way to make it work, win 9 or 10 games, even if Big Ben was in and out of the lineup for half the year. So there's more flexibility with the Steelers than there is the Ravens.
Yeah, true. That's a great point. And again, not wanting to harp on it too much, but say Lamar Jackson gets a similar sort of injury as like that Mahomes got last year, dislocates his knee. Mahomes loses agility and ability to get out of the pocket. So Mahomes is now operating at 80% Mahomes. Still a top 5 quarterback in the NFL and still leads his team to wins and great performances. I don't think Mahomes was 100% at all down the stretch, even in the Super Bowl. Now, applying the same thing to Lamar Jackson, if Lamar Jackson, to me, if he's operating at 80%, the whole thing collapses. He's got to be as fast as he is always, all the time. Of course, speed is one of the first kind of talents or skills that gets, evaporated as you get older, the quickest depreciating asset that an athlete has. And once he loses any of that speed to get around the corner, the game, the whole thing kind of just falls on top of itself. So you get even just an injury that just dings him and slows him down. Doesn't even necessarily ruin his career or even misses any time. But if he's just slowed down, I think that in itself compromises the entire Ravens game plan. So definitely a good point there, Corey. And I think there's so many ways, so many variables that can come into play that creates that sort of situation, especially in this season. There's much less vulnerabilities in a team like the Steelers. Plus, you're getting a much better price. So we'll close with there. Well, I guess Zach was convinced as well. So Steelers across the board, take it to the bank. So that will close.
Thank you, Corey.
This edition of the podcast on the AFC North. So our next preview will be the NFC North. Until then, see you guys. That's the closing bell.